Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, on patrol off the coast of West Africa as nations step up their naval presence to counter the scourge of piracy and hostage-taking. After 6 years of treading water, gold prices are on the rise. We find out what's behind the move.
I'm Osama Bin Javed in Basra, and I'll tell you what's being done to upgrade Iraq's gas infrastructure so it can rely more on its own production rather than imported gas.
A decade ago, no ship was safe off the coast of Somalia. Men armed with machine guns in small boats would target vessels, including aid for the World Food Programme. The menace of piracy continues to plague the region, impeding its security and economic development. But it's also increasing in other areas. The new hotspot is the Gulf of Guinea, an area that covers 6,000 nautical miles or 11,000 kilometres of coastline from Angola to Senegal. West African countries lose $2 billion annually to maritime piracy and armed robbery. The region produces more than 5 million barrels of sweet crude petroleum per day. It's a vital source of oil and gas for Asia, Europe and the United States. Nigeria is the largest oil producer in the region and has more than 40 billion barrels of reserves. Now, some believe the region will surpass the oil production capacity of the Arabian Gulf by 2020, making the stability of this region and the safety of oil transport a vital strategic concern. Off the coast of West Africa, the total cost of piracy has been steadily increasing over the last 3 years, from $700 million to more than $800 million. That's according to data from Oceans Beyond Piracy. But that still dwarfs the cost of piracy off the East African coast, which has dropped to $1.4 billion in 2017, down from a staggering $7 billion in 2010. For every 120 million seized by pirates in Somalia, the cost to the shipping industry and the end consumer is as much as $3.3 billion, according to research from the London School of Economics. This money is enough to employ well over 1 million Somalis for a whole year. And that doesn't include the direct human cost. More than 90% of piracy hostage-taking in the first 6 months of this year took place in the Gulf of Guinea. The International Maritime Bureau says that 27 crew members were kidnapped. Al Jazeera's Ahmed Idris went on patrol with the Ghanaian Navy to discover the true extent of the problem.
Turkish cargo ship Paksoy 1 is more than a week late to its intended destination. Here she is, resting in the calm waters of Tema, off the coast of Ghana. Everything looks all right from the outside, but on board, evidence of why the vessel didn't make it to Ivory Coast on time. The ship was attacked by pirates in Nigerian waters and 10 of its crew taken away as hostages. The others were allowed to stay, but were threatened.
They told us, if you don't coming to here, we are burned the ship, and we are all my friends, we are surrender.
Similar incidents have been reported 78 times in the first 6 months of this year. The International Maritime Bureau says the vast majority of the sailors kidnapped for ransom were taken off the coast of Benin, Cameroon, Guinea, Nigeria, and Togo.
While attacks by pirates have substantially decreased in some regions of the world, they seem to be on the increase in West Africa, making the Gulf of Guinea the worst area in the world impacted by piracy. Fishing boats are sometimes targeted, but most of the attacks were carried out on oil and gas tankers. Experts say that regional navies and coast guards need to coordinate better if they want to control the situation.
We set out on patrol with the Ghana Navy. The Gulf of Guinea is the most dangerous stretch of maritime territory in the world for attacks at sea. But Ghana has seen a decrease in piracy incidents in its waters, and that's been put down to sustained operations by its navy.
A lot of merchant ships prefer to wait in the waters of our countries, and then when they are called upon to their various destinations, they go. Various ships that are attacked, by pirates, when they are released, they feel that Ghanaian waters is the safest, and so that will be the first point of call.
The GNS Airwar is one of several gunships Ghana has on patrol every hour of the day. And sometimes there is support from the Air Force. The Navy believes it could do even more with increased funding.
Not enough resources are, pumped into the Navy, but gradually awareness is being built in the society and the policymakers and in government, and we are gradually being resourced.
But more needs to be done in a region where piracy, kidnappings, and theft of oil are a growing problem. In 2016, Nigeria alone estimated its losses at more than $1 billion a month. Experts say the economies of the region, rich in oil and fishing, cannot sustain such a drain on resources.
All right, let's get more on this growing menace. Joining us now from London, Michael Hallett. Michael is the Deputy Director of the International Maritime Bureau and a Director of ICC Commercial Crime Services, the anti-crime unit of the ICC. Good to have you with us, Michael. So what's behind the rise of piracy off the coast of Guinea, as we were hearing, a strategically important region for world trade?
There is a serious threat to the safety and security of seafarers in the region. And this threat has been there for many years. Almost 80% of crew kidnappings and 95% of crews taken hostage this year have occurred in the Gulf of Guinea. With regards to the kidnappings, there have been 37 crew kidnapped from their vessels this year in 7 separate incidents. The crews are typically taken ashore. They are held between periods of between 6 and 8 weeks before they are released. Last month, 10 seafarers were kidnapped from a general cargo vessel. The vessel was 120 miles from the coastline. This demonstrates the scope of capabilities and also that all shipping is vulnerable. So in terms of hijackings, we've seen...
Sorry, Michael. Let me put this second question to you for a second. What lessons, Michael, can be learned from the reduction of piracy off the coast of East Africa?
It's difficult to compare East Africa with West African piracy. They are two separate phenomena. Somalia was a failed state. In the Gulf of Guinea, you have functioning sovereign states. The one constant, however, is that if you are able to detect an approaching suspicious vessel, you then have the opportunity to raise an alarm, to retreat into a citadel if needed. And this early warning is something that should be applied not just for East and West Africa, but universally when it comes to global piracy. So early detection is paramount. So,
I mean, do West African nations need more help? I mean, what sort of thing can help with this early detection? Are we talking about drones? Do they need more help from Western nations, the US, for instance? Well, there are a number of initiatives, both regional and international, that are underway. All of these nations need help. Where there's piracy, they need help in training to ensure the responses are there, capacity building. But what's really important when it comes to these issues is that the incidents do not go unchecked. They are reported, that the authorities at sea, the navies and the coast guards, they work together with the authorities ashore. They go and try to investigate these crimes. They apprehend the criminals and they make sure they are punished under law. That sends the right deterrent. Are the navies, though, of the big powers, Michael, stretched at the moment? Thinking about the escort missions underway currently in the Gulf, the Malacca Straits, and elsewhere in the world?
All navies have finite resources, and it's really, for the navies and their political masters to decide where to deploy those assets.
Terrific. Michael, really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, from a record high in 2011, gold, it seems, has been in hibernation. But as trade wars start to damage global growth, central banks begin cutting interest rates, and the prospect of conflict is an ever-present threat, the precious metal is trading near a 6-year high. Only it's never really gone out of fashion with central banks, jewelers, and some of the world's biggest investors. So, what's going on? Well, let's start with that record high in 2011. Gold prices hit almost $1,900 an ounce after the financial crisis, although it slid to almost $1,000 in 2016. Now, for the last 6 years, it's been struggling to rise above $1,350 an ounce. But in the last month, it made it to $1,446 and could push higher. The biggest holders of gold are central banks. Last year, they increased the volume of their holdings to the highest level since the end of the gold standard, nearly half a century ago. The United States has by far the biggest stockpile, worth an estimated $350 million. But Russia's holdings have quadrupled over the last decade. The jewelry industry uses about 2,000 tons of gold every year, worth around $85 billion. But it's people in India that are believed to hold the most gold, estimated to be worth around $1.1 trillion. So, is there extra demand for gold, or is this just investors seeking a safe haven? To find out, we're joined via Skype by Gavin Went. Gavin is the founding director and senior resource analyst at Sydney-based MineLife. Good to have you with us, Gavin. So, what's behind gold's recent rally?
Well, we've seen a number of factors that have conspired at exactly the right time to drive gold higher. There have been some more recent factors, I guess, related to things in the last week, for example, related to US interest rate cuts, trade issues, uncertainty with respect to Britain and Iran, and ongoing economic uncertainty. But we can actually trace gold's, strong momentum back to probably the GFC back in 2008. The tremendous amount of spending that went on in the wake of the GFC around the world in terms of money printing by central banks, and also the slashing of interest rates to, in some cases, zero levels or even negative levels in the case of some European countries. And those factors have provided a very, very strong macro picture to drive the gold price higher. So whilst we've seen a lot of action in the gold price over recent months, and particularly the last 6 months, with the price going to very, very high levels, this is a storm that's been building probably for about the last 10 to 12 years. But sometimes these things take a while to develop, and we're starting to see the real upside in the gold price now.
You mentioned this week's rate cut by the Fed. Do you expect to see further cuts in the future? What do rate cuts and rate rises mean for the price of gold?
Rate cuts are typically quite good, positive for the gold price outlook. That is because rate cuts typically lead to a weakening in the US dollar, and a weaker US dollar typically results in a stronger gold price, and vice versa. So what we've seen in the wake of the US interest rate cut was markets looked at the Fed commentary and they examined it, and the Fed was, what they suggested in their commentary was that this was likely to be a one-off rate cut. They weren't likely to follow through with further rate cuts. And the market had been expecting that this would be just the first of a series of rate cuts throughout 2019, perhaps into calendar 2020. However, what we've seen from the Fed in the past is that they say one thing, and they typically tend to do the opposite. And this has particularly been the case over the last 12 to 18 months. If we go back to the same period in 2018, the Fed was talking about likely rate increases, or at least keeping rates on hold. Fast forward to around about April this year, and they were again saying that it was highly unlikely that there were to be any sorts of rate cuts. They couldn't see any rate cuts for the foreseeable future. Here we are in July, August, and they've cut rates. So whilst they say that there's unlikely to be further rate cuts, I think the economic circumstances in the United States will determine that there will be further rate cuts. Certainly President Trump would very much like to see rate cuts, and I think that's what we're going to be looking at. So I think there's going to be further impetus to the price of gold with likely rate cuts to come, if not in the second half of 2019, but I think pushing into 2020 also.
Gavin, Russia has been increasing its holdings. What do you make of that?
Russia, in particular, has been a very strong buyer of gold over recent years, and so has China for that matter. China has come out and actually said that it is buying more gold. The key reason for central banks, not only China and Russia, but other central banks around the world to purchase gold, is they are wanting to diversify their foreign reserves out of the US dollar. There is a view in financial markets that the US dollar is significantly overvalued. And as a result of that, central banks are starting to buy gold in increasing volumes. And particularly if we're likely to see further interest rate cuts, then the direction of the US dollar is going to be down. I think if you look at as the central banks around the world as a collective, during 2018, which is the most recent data we have, they bought about 576 tons of gold. Now, that was the biggest annual purchase of gold by central banks since 2012. And what we've seen in terms of central bank purchases this year, led by Russia, is that 2019 is likely to outstrip purchases from last year. So the trend in terms of central bank buying is definitely upwards.
And just briefly, Gavin, what's your target price for gold?
Well, I've recently revised upward my target price. At the start of calendar 2019, I was looking at a trading range for gold of between $1,250 and $1,350 per ounce. But given the likelihood of further rate cuts, and I'm probably going against the grain here in terms of what market perception is regarding what the Fed will do, I think there are just so many positive factors out there that are driving gold at the moment in terms of risk, economic uncertainty, overvalued US share market, and the likelihood of further rate cuts, that I've upgraded my price forecast for the next 12 months to between $1,300 and $1,450 per ounce. I think there's very strong upside, and there's even the potential for gold to go higher and perhaps challenge the $1,500 mark. I think there's a very strong confluence of events. And I don't think there are any of those issues are going to be resolved anytime soon.
Kevin, it's been really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
My pleasure.
Now, years of war and instability have damaged Iraq's gas and oil infrastructure, leaving it dependent upon energy imports, despite having huge reserves. But Iraq wants to change that with help from big overseas investment. Al Jazeera's Osama Bin Javed reports from Iraq.
Electricity is in high demand, especially during the summer, and power plants rely on gas. Most of it comes from fields like the Basra gas field in the south. And because it's associated gas with oil, a single well provides both oil and gas. But Iraq doesn't produce enough gas for its power stations. A third of what it needs is imported from Iran. In the 1980s, Iranian jets took out most of Iraq's oil and gas infrastructure. Then the sanctions that followed Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait stalled any redevelopment. Now Iraq's economy is weak, the US is an important ally, and both Saudi Arabia and Iran are its neighbors. Iranian gas is a burden on Baghdad's stretched budget and a loaded issue for domestic and regional politics. Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi wants to make Iraq energy independent. His oil minister has already signed multi-billion-dollar deals with international companies such as Honeywell, Exxon and Shell.
Unfortunately, because of the wars, we were delayed. And that's why really the gas industry was lagging behind. Now, we are concentrating on this. In the past, we used to burn more than 50%, 2, 3 years ago. We are now utilizing about 55 and burning 45. I want to be realistic. 45 years, there will be, I would dare to say, there will be candles, not those flares that you see now. Okay? And this, of course, will lead to many advantages. One, of course, providing gas for power generation. It will definitely make Iraq energy independent. We don't need to import. And of course, instead of burning, we'll make revenue out of it.
Maintaining a gas field under 46 degrees is anything but easy. But these Iraqis are making sure that they continue to pump the gas, which helps run their country. Besides the gas needed for electricity, these gas fields also produce other types for domestic use and export. 75% of Iraq's liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG, comes from this gas field. But it is a facility which is more than 25 years old. That's why this section of the plant is being renovated. Its electricals, mechanicals and instruments all are being replaced. To do these upgrades requires major investment. Iraq's government says despite obstacles like corruption, red tape and an unstable region, investors are coming to Baghdad.
Gas is the primary resource in the southern region, especially to generate electricity. Most of the old power plants were modified from liquid fuel operations to gas-powered plants. Hence, there was an urgent need for investment and to upgrade production.
As tensions escalate between US and Iran, Iraq wants to defuse so it can attract more companies to help achieve Baghdad becoming energy independent. These engineers are practicing how to respond to an emergency involving the hazardous H2S gas. They work at the central processing facility of the Majnoon oil field in southern Iraq. What makes their operation unique is that after oil giant Shell left, Iraqis took over. And for the first time, they're running oil and gas extraction on their own.
After Shell pulled out in 2018, Basra Oil Company took charge with the same standards and criteria. Basra Oil Company, in cooperation with other consulting companies, also proved that it has the ability to manage Majnoon oil field, despite the challenges that we face.
One of those challenges is flooding from marshlands around the Majnoon field. This oil well is below the nearly 5-meter high floodwaters around it. The environmental risks mean new oil grids and wells will need to be elevated. Engineers say they've been able to reinforce dikes, but one flooding could submerge their operation. Majnoon means crazy in Arabic. Some say the name is in reference to the large amount of oil in one location. With reserves of an estimated 38 billion barrels, this field produces 240,000 barrels a day, and that capacity is expected to go up to 450,000 in 3 years. The company says it's able to find investors even when the world is moving towards alternative energy sources.
There is no any risk for investment in Iraq. Iraq is very respectful government with any international company. Even with the shortage in financing in 2014, 2015, Iraq committed to pay back all the investor cost and budget within the agreed time. When they invest, when they pay any cost, we return back their payment after 3 months. Oil will stay one of the main energy fuel till 2045.
The oil companies know that Iraq is coming out of years of war. The recent crisis in the Gulf increases risk, and Baghdad needs investment. Sources within the oil ministry told Al Jazeera that some oil companies want to use that to their advantage.
You brought names, I don't want to mention names, but I am a firm believer in a win-win relationship. They cannot blackmail us, and we don't want to twist their arms. They are our partners, and we want to have good relations. But on the other hand, we are monitoring their activities, we are watching the cost. We have managed to reduce the cost. If you look now at the cost per barrel, you see that it was hiking up, but with time it was decreased.
Iraq plans to expand its overall oil production to 5.5 million barrels per day. But as a member of the oil-exporting countries of OPEC, it has to reduce its oil output. Iraq's economy is hinged on oil and faces a tough balancing act. The government has to generate much-needed revenue while abiding by OPEC agreements.
And that is our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, you can tweet me. I'm at @Finnegan on Twitter. Please use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or you can drop us a line. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, even entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.